After all this, you still...
I still want that gas, yes. And you had better deliver.
This is Greenhouse Gaslighting, a free and independent podcast discussing society and culture with a left-wing, down-to-earth perspective. If you've ever wanted a deep dive on the issues, but felt like the bar for entry was too high, then you're in the right place. All right. I'm just going to start with this question because I don't even know. Does anyone know what's going on anymore?
I think that's really sort of the vibe of the moment is whether anyone does. I think we're at this weird point where somehow like everything feels like a third page news story in terms of like where it's at in terms of priorities. Both from like probably to an extent to an inflationary standpoint, but I think especially from like a downgraded standpoint too, right? Like, we have everything going on with ICE still. You have the No Kings protests that are kind of responding to that, kind of responding to a million other things.
Right.
East Wing being torn up, um, bombing Venezuelan boats. Who knows where
Bailing
we're
out
at with any
Argentina,
trade deal.
the snap shutdown scare. What else?
Yeah, like I'm kind of everything and nothing at the same time. And like, I mean, a lot of these stories are of like real consequence and have like a real human cost to them, but it's just all sort of lost, right? And I think it's definitely we're at maybe the peak manifestation of the what did Bannon call the strategy, like the blitz
The
something?
Blitz, yeah. But the thing
Oh,
about the
was it just the
Blitz,
blitz? Okay.
I think it was just called the Bannon Blitz, or I forget, or just the Blitz. But the whole thing about it, because I'm remembering that we even talked about it in January. It kind of feels weird that we could brace ourselves for it at that point in time, and then even though we knew it was coming, still come out of it like really bewildered. Um, if I'm trying to stack this up to even the first Trump term because it was probably the first time the pace being set this bewilderingly happened. The first Trump term was pretty chaotic, but you had a couple adults in the room, quote unquote, that like kept the very thin patina of institutional respectability somehow. And then with it being completely off the rails this time, I mean, the driving factor that's been consistent these past couple months is the cruelty being the point. That has not changed at any point. But
Correct.
I think just with the amount of scandals that we knew a Trump administration was going to rack up eventually, this simultaneous cruelty while stabbing themselves, I don't know how else to describe it, right? With the post Charlie Kirk psychosis that has taken the country, right? I'd say like that's probably like the lampshade of like why we haven't been on air, just because like how do you get into this environment when the right felt like they were ready to crack down, only to stay down but show their asses the entire time, right?
Yeah.
It's like the we talk about like the shock doctrine in austerity regimes a lot, but I don't think it's ever come with this much scandal, incompetence, wanton cruelty, and just like confusion in recent years. Like this is a very unique um stage in neoliberal decline, if we want to call it that. And I think it is prescient, or it is, sorry, oh my god, I haven't done this in a minute. It's probably important to call out that the government being shut down over, guess what, of all things, Jeffrey Epstein, when you think about it, is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any other way to put it. It is insane, and like,
But
eh, I mean, I've been torn on whether that's the underlying motive, but I mean, I can't really think of what else it would be at this point.
I mean that's I don't know. There's been this read I've been taking a look at that I kind of like, which is if they couldn't make the nobody wants to work slogan whip labor back into shape, was the best thing to use this pincer attack of automation taking jobs in some sense to along with just cruel wanton austerity
Well,
to
I
kind of
mean,
well, go
you
ahead.
I was gonna say on the AI thing real quick. I mean, Jerome Powell said that job creation is pretty much near zero the other day.
And this is the other maddening thing. There's so many things that just like it's been difficult to unwind, but that was another thing that I don't remember if we even talked about it, right? Of the jobs report always being a cooked book and Trump still disputing it, you know. The AI bubble has been never more starkly exposed and somehow they're still keeping this facade going.
Yeah,
It's maddening to try
and I
to
think what's yeah, yeah, and I think it like stands out with just how much there's been, this forced fixation on it, right, with respect to the labor market, and I think we're really kind of at this perfect moment to highlight kind of every kind of perverse dynamic going on, right? Where,
Yeah,
to the extent, I mean, and really, I would say like the no one wants to work anymore thing. What jobs were we really talking about even back
right,
then?
right,
We're talking, your service jobs. We're talking like in like low end service jobs, right? It's that, hey, I'm waiting an extra 5 minutes in line at McDonald's. I don't know if that that specific example was super widespread, but that was primarily it, right? Stores are closing earlier. The consumer convenience was at a like kind of all time low, in terms of like physical storefronts, things like that, retail. And one of the things with that is right, like no one wants to work at that partly because it's it's an inherently dehumanizing gig in some ways. It's a decent not to like completely buy into this frame rate, but it's a decent kind of quote unquote starter job, right? This is something that you're using to make some cash. It's not a career. Um, it's ideal for like those high turnover environments, but at the same time, if you work on those enough and you like, if that's like your only income, like in your house, right? You're not like a teen who, maybe your parents are charging you like like a rent fee, but probably not in some cases, right? This is just like you're spending cash. Um, it works fine, but if this is like your only income, you need things like SNAP benefits
right,
and things like that, right? I mean, the joke with SNAP and these other programs, right, was that they were um, programs that are there to help Walmart, let their
right,
employees
right.
live at, at a cost of living thing, right? And we're at this time where it's like we're trying to replace higher end jobs with this stuff. There's been a broader economic trend, I think, of just I don't know. I mean, just really making labor of any type as miserable as possible. Cutting down workers, forcing more people to work more hour, or fewer people to work more hours and get more done. It's like how can we like minimize the labor costs while maximizing productivity? Um, AI might supplement that. It's not really there yet, and I think most of these places that have people performing more advanced tasks already realize this, but they don't really care. Maybe it's just that they've invested so much in this anyways that they just don't have a choice in their mind, or whatever else it is. Right? It's just again maybe the cruelty is the point, as you so eloquently highlighted at the start of this.
It's kind of when you put it in that sense, the revanchist strike from like the billionaire class seems to be this to reintroduce open cruelty in the labor system, right? To reintroduce precarity in a really stark context. Um it's real absurd shock doctrine shit, um, maximized to the cruelest key, and it doesn't even make sense at a point, right? Why demand labor for easy consumer goods, then use the most racist deportation regime we've had in a while, um, to deport that labor
Which
force?
is saying a lot. That's a pretty high
Yeah,
bar.
right. Exactly, right? I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling trying to make sense of this. In a way, it's like if you look at the Biden years as an old man's fever dream, we're in a different old man's fever dream, and this one is far more motivated by absolute alienation, absolute exploitation. Not that the previous regime may have been better on that, right? But the Fortress
But I mean, there's a
America.
difference in sort of this symbolic celebration of it, right? Like
Yes,
I think
yes,
that's a
like the
major
celebration of the
departure from it.
cruelty.
I mean, because the Biden years, I mean, I was, gosh, I was arranging some. Maybe I've mentioned this on the show before. I'm not sure, but I was rearranging some books on like my office shelves, and I had someone had given me the Biden inauguration poem, like as a printed book and whatnot. And I was just
Okay.
like looking through this. I was like, wow, like what a different time that was, right? And it's just that
Yeah.
specific 2020 or early 2021 moment of like we have like passed through the darkness, and now we're just like I don't know, like publicly masturbating in the darkness.
It's there's just something so bizarrely hollow about it, right? Like naked wanton cruelty, the most like obvious enablement of jackbooted thugs in the streets with ICE, right? Just absolutely
Mm,
subsidizing these guys to play mercenary, um on
yeah.
really just grabbing. I don't. Here's the thing. Everyone's like, what if these people are innocent? It's not about innocence if you believe in like civil rights, right? Those are the bare minimum things we owe people in this country. Why do we have to call anyone's fucking innocence into the question for due process? And now we're
Right, and
just like,
I think the stuff with I was gonna say the stuff with Venezuela is probably like the biggest like highlight of this, right? Where it's we're using this. I mean, this is the most extreme version of it too, right? We're using the I guess this concept of the war on drugs to justify a crackdown, and we're just outright killing people with no due process, right? That's the most maximal version of this we've ever had. Um, on top of what's going on with ICE, where we're seeing that like there's some people where and I called this right at the beginning where I was like, if they're actually serious about doing this type of immigration crackdown that they're going to talk about, that in order to achieve this, there's going to be a lot of people who are innocent, who are citizens of this country, who haven't done anything wrong anyways, who are going to be impacted just virtue of the scale and the speed that this wants to be done. And we're
exactly.
offering insane hiring bonuses to incoming ICE agents. We're coaxing them with blatantly racist ads. Right? They're deliberately trying to recruit a certain demographic of individual into this
Yes.
agency to accomplish these things. And it's like there's going to be obvious consequences to this, and we're seeing them.
I mean, let's call it what it is, right? Is we are seeing a full scale hollowing out of the federal budget to create a domestic fry corp for Trump.
Yeah,
It is
and we've
not an
seen the
exaggeration to say that.
for as much of the federal budget has been chipped away, it's been vastly expanded on things like immigration and customs enforcement and
Yes.
other groups like that. It's very much this clear reallocation of where funds go, and like this is seen as a priority. And I mean, I'm sorry, this is like where it gets to this kind of how do we like relate to our neighbors and stuff like this in this environment? And I think this is where it's like become increasingly difficult in this political moment. And as hard as it's been throughout this, where it's just how do you reconcile differences? if your priority, if your top priority is like we need to deport people, that's more important than education, any type of welfare. Which I mean, I get that that gets into their weird, morality gospel of, their prosperity gospel and stuff like that, and all that kind of cultural nonsense. But like, there's a million other things that you do not see as more important. That like, it's difficult to engage with that.
Yeah. I mean that's probably the defining characteristic, right? Is have we reached a point of, and I wouldn't even call this polarization at this point. I would even just because if you think about it, yeah, there is maybe a left contingent in the United States. There's a liberal base for the Democratic Party. We can argue all that. Centrism doesn't mean anything. I'm not convinced it means anything. But if you look at the right TM, right, it has shifted so aggressively to the far right at this point. I don't that's the real process here. It's not polarization. It's that the right has become far more radical in
And that
recent
to be
years.
And that, to be fair, is like when you talk about polarization, you show the charts. That is usually kind of how it is. But like,
Okay.
it's a more nuanced thing, right? That whereas like when you say polarization, you kind of just think of it as like both sides. It's this
Right.
funnel gap, and it's in the most minor senses are you seeing sort of a shift to the left from the Democratic Party, and again, like maybe some of our metrics of this don't necessarily count well, but like on the right, I mean, it definitely passes the vibe check, I guess, and also kind of what we've been seeing for a while.
And
Um,
what and to
yeah,
that
go for
point
it.
too, right, is I guess what we weren't prepared for in this term, or this might just be my perception, right, is the right-wing media apparatus that we've talked about so many times has really been playing up its cultural um propaganda project. I don't know how else to call it, to the point that like the median opinion can get tainted off of that. I think that's been their successful strategy lately. I don't know how well it plays, right? But we don't have to get into this too deep, but if you look at the way that the right was able to turn Charlie Kirk, a right-wing political commentator, who was probably marginal, had some sway in bringing the evangelicals into the Trump orbit, right?
Well, I think where he was particularly important. I mean, a lot of people emphasize the youth engagement. I don't. I mean, we can debate on what that engagement looks like, but I think really where he might have been more impactful is the fact that he very clearly had ins with a lot of like the political elites
Well,
in
and
the
that's the
right.
thing, is he was the last gasp of the evangelical right. He was the last eldritch creation from their foul breath. I'm That's how I'm going to describe it, right? And it's going to sound like I'm being insane when I say this, but like him getting shot, and I'm not here to make any claims on what happened that day, right? It was the biggest opportunity for the evangelical right and the overall right in America and its global, points of connection to other right wing forces across the world, to take a major opportunity to demand sympathy from the general public. And I think a lot of people, even well meaning, fucking fell for it. And of course, enough people were like, yeah, fuck this guy. Or enough people were like, nah, I saw what he was doing his whole career. Like, I don't mourn this guy at all. But I think they were successfully able, to some extent, take advantage of, like, I mean, we've seen this strategy 1,000 times, waving the bloody shirt, right?
Mhm.
For their martyr. And just, I don't know, like, I don't know how it's going to play out in a general sense. I still believe that there will be a woke lash and we should all be ready for it. If you're in support of a woke lash, get ready. But um I think they have successfully browbeaten a certain kind of institutional player into feigning or acquiescing sympathy and legitimacy to the right, and they've kind of seized the narrative of political radicalism as the left is attacking us. I don't know how many people will fall for it, but in the context of the United States and how we've been drifting to the right, it could be catastrophic.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to kind of unpack there. So I'm gonna
Oh
start with
yeah.
kind of the beginning with like the right wing ecosystem too, and sort of like that kind of cultural galvanism, if you will,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
polarization is not. But I was thinking that because there's been a lot of recent controversy with Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, like really kind of cozying up. The Heritage Foundation has embraced this little union. So,
Mhm.
and this was kind of one of their quote unquote warnings, which again, like the idea of like, oh, well, you killed Charlie Kirk, so we're gonna go super far right is kind of preposterous. But like this was something where it's like, like okay, well, like Fuentes is further to the right, and to be honest, I'm not really sure to what extent that's even really true. Um, like full disclosure, I'm not necessarily sure that there's really. I mean, there's political differences, but I don't. I, I think trying to just separate it into who was more conservative than who, I think kind of misses the point on a lot of things. But you have
You're
this
definitely
embrace there.
right. It's just Fuentes paints himself as further to the right. I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it kind of gets to that moment too when you're talking about with their responses, right? There's been this big like Charlie Kirk was a moderate, I mean
Turning
to
him into
anyone
a
who
civil rights hero was insane. Like that, I
right,
think
I mean,
drove me up the wall.
and not even like just like borrowing the aesthetics, like just openly saying this was a champion of civil rights, which um is beyond laughable. I mean, I can't think of a single like even if you're just your free speech warrior type. He wasn't like super in favor of free speech beyond a very specific context. I mean, it's
Yep.
you're right. Like it was this. I would say he was probably the last like particularly relevant like right wing evangelical who maybe bought into what he was saying from a like purely evangelical standpoint, right? Because I think a lot of the others are very clearly, to the extent that they're relevant, I think are very clearly like grifters, right? Your Jordan Peterson can't even like openly admit that he's a Christian. He also might be dying, based on something I had seen recently, for reasons unrelated to the subject. To be clear, medical issues. But I don't have any forecast. That's how that might have
It's
come
just I
across.
I don't know. Every time I remember when Jordan Peterson was the real boogeyman, and like to be clear, what he was saying was absolutely dangerous. I'm not downplaying that. But just the
Sure.
way his public image folded when like his neuroticism really became obvious, and like losing that
Yeah,
debate to Zizek in like the most humiliating fashion, like I think that really erased a lot of his public credibility, except with like
I think
that
you're
right
right.
wing contingent.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And the other thing too, with like in response to Kirk's shooting, is like you've been getting, and it's weird because I was looking through one of my students' things talking about one of the articles, or it was something recent from Jesse Waters talking about this, where the frame of like the left is like dangerous, they're out for blood. The fact that someone like even someone as insipid as Chuck Schumer could inspire someone to violence. Maybe the Baileys, who knows? But it's like simultaneously we have to accept this frame from them, and I think I don't think it really pans out in terms of the public believability thing, which kind of gets to another point. But that the left is simultaneously like super violent, but also like feckless, cringy, and pathetic.
Right.
Um,
Which is
the
it?
way they talk about the No Kings protests, all that stuff, like those are inherently contradictory ideas.
Exactly.
Um, And to your point on like where somebody feel like bought it hook, line, and sinker, I just think of the number of people like in like the liberal space who every time one of these things happen, and then this time, right? I mean, this was again, I haven't seen like the latest quote unquote verdict on like what exactly the shooter's motivations were. Right.
That
I mean,
got buried pretty quick.
yeah, like it seems like there was maybe some liberal or leftist sympathies, but I don't think far enough that like I think that that was like the motivating point, right? I think there's it's just the history of a lot of political shooters in this country is that they're just kind of disturbed individuals, right? That they're not necessarily politically motivated.
Yeah, from
Um,
McKinley's assassin onwards. Yeah.
right. And they've been trying to like make this big push on this, but I think what's frustrating is that like on the liberal side, from like a lot of these like people in the intellectual space and the political elite space, if you would, they always make this effort to like bend over backwards to grovel at this moment, to like self-flatulate, like we are, like forgive us, we're putting ourselves on the cross. And like every time that something like this happens, even they did it with the Trump assassination attempt, and they're proven to be like fools in like the long term, and even here, right? It's like, well, okay, well now that the right is using this as like this entire indictment on the political violence on the left is like far outweighs the political violence on the right, even though we've had a bunch of attacks since. There was the one more close to home, right? There was, and that was that in Dearborn,
There was one in
the Mormon
Dearborn. There
church
was
burning.
there, the one in Dearborn was recent, but yeah, there was the church burning. I can't remember where that was, but a
That
lot
might have
of
been
shit.
around Flint.
Yes,
I
yes,
can't
that
remember.
was in Flint. Yeah, it was in Flint. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so, like, but you had that, and that was, like, that was a right-wing motivated attack on
Yep.
this particular church and whatnot, and the fact that you have these, JD Vance, Mike Johnson, all these folks who, like, when even confronted with that fact, just reject it, bury it, and just try to drill home this talking point. There's some opinion polls, like, been following the stuff for, like, related to the shutdown in particular, because I wasn't sure how the public would perceive it in terms of blame. But for the most part, even though the fact that like the right seems to kind of just have the media captive at this point,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like it's really translating into like actual public support for them. So I mean, there is that. I mean, there's
Okay.
maybe debate over how much public support actually matters. Maybe it should matter more in a democracy than it does, but because I think like we're looking at the most. NBC had one. There's like a 10-point gap in who identifies the Republicans versus the Democrats is to blame. And the Republicans have been spending this entire month that we've been shut down just 24/7 blaming the Democrats, whereas the Democrats have been kind of asleep at the wheel, mulling over whether they should endorse, their party's nominee for a mayor in New York, among various other just weird issues that they're mulling over.
So, I mean, on that same lens, because we can probably talk about we could talk about Zoran in a sec, but have you seen I think, so this one rep who needs to be sweared in to end the shutdown. Um, I think her home state's Arizona, and there's been a suit filed against Mike Johnson for his refusal to enable the swearing in. Have you seen anything about that?
Yeah, so they technically don't need her in to end the shutdown per se. This was her vote getting in would give them, I believe, the numbers to um, release the Epstein files,
Yes, yes, that's what it
which
was.
is
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
the bigger issue. Yeah, but yeah, Mike Johnson has said that like, well, we're not in session, so we're not going to swear her in. He has made a million excuses that do not make any sense for this. Part of what's concerning with this, and I think their tactics with the shutdown from a perspective of like political bricksmanship, just not bringing the House into session is kind of smart. In the sense that it, just preventing them, you don't have to worry about anyone caving, right? You can just be like, yeah, we're just gonna do this. Um, and we're not gonna actually conduct any business. It's also really problematic And I think that's the case here too, right? It's like this shows again some of the like weird flimsiness of the system that I don't think any of
Right.
us really appreciated before. That like, well, wait a minute, like yeah, there's this process, but like how much of this process is just sort of norms based expectations?
Yep.
That like yeah, like it makes sense to not do this, but like at this point, right? Do you just like well, we're just not going to call the House back into session to swear in the next Congress, right? Like, where does this end? Where's the natural end point of this?
And I mean that's the
Assuming the
thing, because
lawsuit doesn't.
oh my gosh, because like again, like things like the snap order being blocked by a judge, right? Like this has been my joke all year of save me Reagan era judge. Anytime there's been like some action to stop it, it's always been like a Reagan era judge like ruling against it. But yeah,
I mean,
it
in
just
some
feels
cases, it's even been of some of his own judges too,
right,
shockingly
right.
enough.
So it's like I don't know to what extent the Republican strategy was, can we use a shutdown government as an excuse to keep this rig rolling until someone challenges us? I don't know if that was the play. If I don't even know if that's even a good strategic calculation. But it's starting to feel like, well, let's just shut it down and see how far we get.
I think that is the strategy, right? Whether it's a
Okay.
good one or not is maybe a separate issue. Um, but I think that very much that's my read on it. This does seem to be,
Okay.
and one of the things too is like you don't really see them like saying like, oh well, we really need to get the House back in session so we can work on X, Y, and Z. They don't seem really interested in any policy after passing this budget, to the extent they're even interested in that much.
Which is what's getting so confusing about all of this, and I promise this is gonna go somewhere. Um, I think like amid even like the ICE deportation racket, even though its cruelty is still like proceeding, you're seeing like examples of people resisting, everyday people just taking matters into their own hands and kind of shaming ICE out of doing what they're doing. You have people kind of very bravely resisting in their own ways in their own cities, right? And I think
Mhm.
like, the idea that you could relitigate the BLM protest discourse in 2025 may be challenged, at the ballot box this year. I don't know how it's going to translate though, because as we're finding out, most Americans do not have a consistent ideology you can predict things based off of. And I think that's
Yeah.
like one of the challenging things when like you start descending in your quote unquote leftist journey, right? You start to develop a more consistent worldview. You start to develop an examination of reality outside of your ideology sometimes, right? Ideology isn't this backspace to explain why you're seeing what you're seeing. Um, but for a lot of people, ideology is just like a backfill. It's something you order a la carte in an American context, right? And I don't think people act predictably these days, especially. How do you explain things like a Trump to Zoran voter? I don't get that. But with that being said, you know, Trump was like this anchoring figure for the right in recent years. And you could say that insofar as the right had any consistency, it was around the character and personage of Trump. As we're starting to see him just sunset in real time, right? Him just very openly, even though he's still as cruel and as like just stunted as always, right? Having a fucking 1920s gala in the New East Wing instead of doing anything of substance and just continuing on the
It's his
same
only priority, according to his
right.
own press secretary.
Like he'll drop like another like absolute geopolitical horror hit every now and then, but just otherwise just being openly in the press. I'm dying and I'm probably going to hell, folks. Like quite openly, right?
Well,
Um,
not going quite as far as saying that he's dying. He seems to be pretty reluctant to admit anything of that nature. But definitely, I mean, he did admit that I'm probably not going to heaven.
right, right. So it's like at some point I feel like the hidden chaos inside the Trump camp is probably not going to come out for a couple years. Maybe there'll be like a big expose published in the Times that might be fun to read. But
I think
aside from that,
I think where we'll I honestly like, and I think it's the big contrast to the first term. I think it'll come out like when he dies.
I think that will be the time it's revealed. Yeah.
Mostly because I think at that point you'll have enough like internal friction. Because my guess is a lot of people in the White House do not like each other, but they are centralized enough.
Especially now
Yeah,
without like the HR McMasters and Rex Tillersons and Steve Mnuchin's to kind of guide things.
right. And I suspect that there's probably a lot of like internal issues. And I think Trump's even alluded to this that he likes making them fight, mostly for his amusement,
I
seemingly.
wouldn't be shocked. I would not be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in his position with those people, I mean, I guess you got to make the most of it, right? Um, but that is, I think, why we won't really see anything until like he expires, because I just think that like really he is, and I'm it's interesting to see where the party will wind up in that, right? Especially with, is he going to run for another term? I mean, that's been open. I mean, that's increasingly openly flirted with, and I think part of why they're okay with it, not just because they don't really give a shit about democracy anyways, but I think a lot of it too is just that I don't think they really see a super clear successor, right? I mean, like, I guess the nominal pick is JD Vance, but I have a very hard time picturing him being president. Like, even if Trump died tomorrow, I have a hard time picturing JD Vance, even though like that's literally like the only constitutional confines of his job. I have a hard time imagining that outcome.
Well, that's what I was probably going to jump into next, right? Because JD has been uh in the spotlight this weekend as of late.
Yeah.
Um and I would probably argue that given just the tabloid nature of the Trump base and given how weird that display with Erica Kirk was.
Well,
And
let's rewind.
yeah, let's rewind a
I was
bit.
gonna say, let's rewind the clock a little bit on JD, because I would really say, um, we've had a major shift in him since Charlie Kirk died, and it kind of relates just right into exactly where you're going. But I think because that
Right.
was where he like just he was on vacation, pretty much like 24/7 vacation, like constantly, right? He was constantly going to places. He's cutting interviews about how like, oh yeah, like my family had a great time at Disney World. Sorry about the long lines, everyone. Ha ha. Like someone who's just not taking his job seriously. He's just using it as a
Right.
paid vacation excuse. Um, and then once Kirk died, he did the episode where he like filled in for him on Turning Point. Very much doing kind of the same stuff that like Erica Kirk has been doing. And I mean, I normally wouldn't necessarily like, point out how someone is grieving as, problematic, but the way she's been grieving is raises questions.
Well, I'll put
Um,
it this way. Okay? I'm not here to talk about what Erica Kirk feels and does in private, but since we understand kayfabe conceptually on this show, right? There's something to be said about grieving publicly, isn't there?
yeah,
And to kind of like really like truzzle like JD's hair and like be like, oh, he reminds me of Charlie. That seems to me like the kind of kayfabe you'd want to build like a narrative, right?
right.
The the Trump, fandom needs a new narrative. Why not build it around deceased hero Charlie's wife and the vice president? Because that's what this is to people. It's a fucking soap opera, right?
Well, and,
Why
and
not
she's
why not
been
take that route?
yeah, and I mean, like for her whole image, to the extent that it existed pre Charlie's death, it was like kind of very much like kind of this traditional trad wife, right? Like she on a show claimed to be more conservative than him. all this stuff. Then, like there's, you have the episode with the empty chair right after his death, and she comes out and, gives a speech. Then you have like his memorial thing, which was like this weird rally, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
She comes out to pyro, she's hugging Trump, and then the JD Vance one. I don't even know what was it just the Turning Point conference or something?
There was some turning point event at Ole Miss, and I think that's yeah.
Yeah, and she just, as I said, like, like, I mean, literally the quote is, "No one will ever replace my husband, but I do see some similarities of my husband in JD." And I think that might have been the next day after, or maybe it was the same thing, where after that weird embrace, which, I mean, there's something to be said about, when is it appropriate to move on, right? I'm not here to judge that, but that's a very bizarre thing to say about a married man.
Well, especially at a turning point event, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
With the vice president there, again, kayfabe, branding, building narratives.
Yeah.
Because in WWE, right, like what is it about? It's about the narratives that lead up to the fight.
Yeah, like, and it's like, what is the narrative here? Also at that event, Vance also throws his own wife under the bus.
Which is
Talking
where it
about,
gets funnier.
yeah. And this kind of gets into your, direct diaspora in politics, right? Your love-hate relationship with Indian
with my
Americans in politics.
with my own community. How about that, right? So
Right. Maybe it's less
um
love-hate and more just pure
oh my
fucking
god.
hate. I don't know.
So one of the guests we've had before on the show, Decrepit Zoomer, he has this iconic line, which is there an Afro pessimism for South Asians? And then the immediate reply, it's just being South Asian.
Fair
So with
enough.
that, right? But I mean, there's a lot that's been on my mind about the nature of caste in like Hindu society and how that dynamic has kind of carried over into Indian American thought on conservative politics, especially. And even if someone's not as conscious or as opinionated about caste politics, it definitely will undergird a right wing view on, pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, being inherently deserving, this, that, and the third. And you can kind of see it in guys like Vivek Ramaswamy, if anyone remembers that cretin.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of trying to equate his brand of religious worldview with evangelical Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Trying to say that, hey, we believe all the same things you do. And I think like there's a strong degree of this that comes from the fact that a good contingent of upper caste Hindus were really complicit in British colonialism. And it comes from this deep, deep insecurity about wanting to be seen as equal to Europeans in some sense. And I think that primordial sin translates to what we're seeing today, right? And I'm not here to talk about, oh, all interracial relationships are bad. Shocker, me and my wife are different races. And yes, I dropped that. You can wish me congratulations later, dear listeners. That being said,
I was gonna, say. I mean, you just like we didn't really do like a whole lot of talking before. I was like, do you want to like share that? And but you just immediately like bots in. Let's open the show. I'm like, oh, okay. Like
but yeah, I've had a lot on my mind. I
the
gotta
cold mid-tro, I guess.
the cold metro. I've been so divorced from
Divorced
who
already?
let me oh my god, oh my god.
Wasn't that long
No,
ago?
no, no, no. So I've just been feeling like so out of touch with like those aspects of me that people know and appreciate me for, right? And I think that's like the personality I think I'm trying to express when I do the podcast, right? And I think part of the reason why it was also hard to just get back into the swing of doing this is I just felt so disconnected from the piece of me that really has an interest in this stuff. So that being said,
You could
um
have said you were on your honeymoon. I mean, you could have. There was a
no,
million other things you could you could have
no, oh
taken.
my god, no, we just we gave up. We were like, we're eloping. In this economy, you got to do what you got to do. And I mean that's been our joke is let's just get married real quick before they repeal Loving v Virginia. Who knows? So that's all that is to say that like I'm not here to comment on the validity of interracial relationships. I'm guilty as charged, but in a right wing context, especially when you think about how JD was initially this kind of centrist type, kind of pitching this critique of Appalachia to, um and it just again it's a type of politics that just doesn't exist anymore. It's crazy, right? But trying to like, throw Appalachians under the bus to like conventional American political society of, well, the industrialization was bad, but these people deserved it, was his whole pitch. And
Yeah.
casting off this identity to become cosmopolitan. Was he at Harvard Law or Stanford Law? I can't remember. Very again, just pursuing an elite,
Yale.
prestigious, yeah, Yale. So Yale Law. He meets his wife there, and it's very. I feel bad for her in some sense as well, right? To like kind of watch what
Yeah,
could
I
have
always
been
go
private life just get called into the open and watch this guy act in the most cringeworthy fucking ways to like really cozy up to the right. I can
right,
see
and I
why her
always
hair's gray now. I can see it.
yeah, I mean, because it's kind of recently, right?
Yes,
But
yes.
I'm always a little torn on how I feel about like these significant others of like political spouse, like the political spouses and whatnot. Um, where it's like like do I feel sorry for them or is this kind of just like what you married this guy? Like I mean your worldview is not exactly a whole lot better than theirs or whatever. But she's in a kind of a weird case where definitely like you had a brief moment in the campaign where um, and we, ironically, I think we did talk about this a little bit at your wedding too. The fact that it sort of seems like one sort of Israel Palestine boils over in the American public discourse with a lot
Yeah.
of with Jewish people kind of in a major forefront of that, include especially on the right. Um, like Indians are seem to be queued up next. And we kind of saw it with Vivek, right? There was
Right.
that immediate
You're
criticism
seeing
of
with Cash Patel.
yeah, but you had the H-1B visa questions. D'Souza, who I haven't thought of in years. I saw
Oh my
him
god.
come up on Twitter because like, God, the comment towards him was like the most like racist and unhinged thing I've ever seen. And like about how he has no soul, which I'm like that's true, but it's not because he's Indian.
Right.
It's like this is partially true, but you're getting the causality is a little backwards here. Um, but he's just like, where did this come from? And it's like, what do you mean where this has come from? And I remember JD Vance during the campaign was kind of surprised when people were critical of his wife. I don't think the children have come up as much. Um, but I think that's inevitable too, right? Like, I mean, he's not bringing them out to events. And kids are historically great political props, right? They're very humanizing. Um, I think he knows that they're liabilities to him, which I mean is a terrible way to like talk about,
Well, no, but
people that you
let's
theoretically
get in.
love. But
Let's get
I
into that
don't think, yeah.
because that's the thing, right? Is JD literally pitched himself as like on board with bringing Indian Americans into the right wing fold. That's how he built his base up in Ohio, I would reckon, right? And having an Indian wife
Mhm.
is how you make inroads there. He's over on Joe Rogan talking about how he prefers Indian food to like vegan meals, quote unquote, to like trigger the left, right? He's taking that whole angle, and it's like again, once Indian people stop being useful to in like any fascist project, the minute you stop being useful, you're next on the chopping block. And I think it's a combination of factors, right? You need Indian people as an easy scapegoat because you want to contract out labor, so H-1B labor is good for that. But also when Trump needs to make something up about, his progress on stopping the war with Russia and Ukraine, India is another convenient scapegoat there because they're accepting Russian oil. Bear in mind, Trump had no opposition to that deal up until recently, right?
Mhm.
So that's what I'm saying, right? Is that it's a combination of needing a scapegoat plus Vance, if he is angling for the presidency. This is why it's good that you said let's take a step back, because now we actually got a full sweep of this, right?
Yeah.
Um, he needs to start cozying up to the Fuentes right. You know what I'm saying? If they're going
Yeah.
to become, even if their numbers are overstated, it's clear that they influence the discourse and they want people to consult them in some sense, right? They want their influence known on the discourse. That's why the
Well,
right is always accounting for that kind of racism, right? So I feel like
yeah.
throwing his wife under the bus at a turning point event, an evangelical event, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, like explicitly saying, "I wish he would convert," and whatnot.
Yes.
And this is, and I said, like the tune is very different than it was a year ago. Where I wouldn't necessarily describe it as the most glowing endorsement of his wife and her, separate religious views, but it was at least a little bit more tolerant and accepting of them than now, where it is, it's politically inconvenient. He needs to sell himself as a true believer, and a true believer, you kind of have to believe that, like, well, if conversion is your gateway to heaven. Like, I don't want my wife to go to hell, right? Like, it makes sense from that perspective. But he's someone who's also openly identified himself in the past as not very religious. But again, he is a perfect example of how you rebrand yourself
Yep.
to, you know, pursue power. And I think with the Erica Kirk thing too, like it's just like on her end as well. It's like this is like pretty naked, like how do I like move myself like like social status climbing via romantic partners, right? This is straight out of the cultural handbook of the feudal era, and
It's
plenty
oh
of
my
other
god.
cultures. Like,
No, you're spot on with that, because I think it's like, one, she builds her profile, but then two, it means that turning TPUSA's institutional status doesn't get lost.
yeah, because I know she's and again like, a weird way to like talk about things, right? But it's like, oh, he and Charlie Kirk left us like all this stuff that we can still use. Which I don't. I mean, obviously, I imagine there's a lot of like just archival material for a lot of things over the years. Um, full disclosure to our viewers, I don't predict that either of us will be like just recording a bunch of episodes that'll sit around to be released after our death.
Right.
Um, and I mean, that's just, I mean, I don't, to me, like there's kind of a weird element to that. Anyways, right? Like, oh, here's some new content from like a dead person. Um, I don't know, like, and especially with that, where it's so much of it's just like kind of a reflection on timely events, and like we know that like a lot of like his owning the libs at debates, we know a lot of those are you know
Staged.
not brought, yeah, they're staged, but we also know that they're not, the ones that aren't being broadcasted for a reason. It's not because like, oh, we were saving it for a rainy day. It's I look bad in these situations.
No, for real. It's I don't know what to say about just the naked um shamelessness of the right at this point. Because even contrast this with, because not to shift topics, but um the fact that embedded within all this was also the bailout of Argentina's anarcho-capitalist regime and
Yeah,
tying it to Javier Milei's re-election prospects. We've talked at length about Milei before. I don't need to reiterate what a freak this guy is, but I think it needs to be reiterated that the regime that wants the bailout, so I'm talking about our government, with its deep right turn, with its um, deployment of paramilitary goons on our streets, right?
right.
Um, wants to bail out an explicitly identified anarcho-capitalist, the only person in history who took his Reddit ass fake ideology and said, nah, I'm going to base actual decisions on this, needs a fucking bailout, which is funny enough. Who would have thought that a libertarian couldn't fucking make it work? No one's fucking shocked. But what doesn't shock me is that Milei's stated policy is to incite and start violence with the left. By default, he has revealed himself to always be an anti-communist. And I don't see um any confusion on why the right wants him reinstated. That is not shocking to me. You know what I'm saying? Any
Yeah.
force suppressing the left and being willing and open to do it is not it does not come as a shock to me.
No, I mean, I think that's totally fair, and I think you see a little bit of a pushback on the right here with mostly because I mean I think a lot of the right wing movements here are very nativist in nature, so
Yeah.
they're always going to kind of like like why are we bailing out another country, and I think the arguments here are so flimsy for it anyways, right?
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's amusing with like, Trump's like, well, they could starve and want. I'm like, we don't care about that anywhere else. Like we're seeing it in Palestine, no one cares in the administration.
We're seeing it in Sudan, no one cares. It's we're
Right.
seeing it
We're
globally.
gonna cut SNAP and no,
Right.
no one
Right.
in the administration cares. Like it's like let's not pretend. Um, but it's like we don't have an environment that I think is really ripe for pushing back on it, and it's wild because like they already kind of achieved the outcome, right? And yet we're still like stuck with like, oh no, we're still going to do the bailout, right? Like he won re-election, but um we'll still help him out anyways, just because we'll screw over anyone else on a deal, but this one
Yeah.
case we must help him. And you had the whole thing about like the beef deal, the fact that
Oh
our
my gosh.
completely defanged FDA still thinks that like most of that beef is like tarnished meat. Um, like even by like U.S. standards too, it's like come on. And this gets to kind of another weird genre of things because there was some pushback from some cattle farmers, right?
Yeah.
A demographic that traditionally supports Republicans, but especially Trump. And you get like these like clips from TikTok and elsewhere where it's like, oh, cattle farmers tell Trump what's on their mind. And it's always like the most gentlest of rebukes possible, right? Like, this seems like socialism to me, bailing out another country. But it's always like the way they talk about Trump. And that's like why, like, to the extent that, Trump derangement syndrome is an actual thing,
Yeah.
I think it's the belief that like these groups are just they're just on the cusp of turning on him. That to me is like the most like I think like just like out there belief that like some of these people have, because it's like yeah, you look at like these folks, it's like anytime that Trump does something that they don't like or that they know is like yeah, this is gonna like devastate us, they talk about him like he's this bystander, that he has no control over these outcomes that he has directly, created. He's just this bias, it's like, oh, like please, Mr. Trump, fix it for us. It's never like never a strong rebuke from any of these groups, whether it's, farmers who are poorly impacted by various elements of this trade war and now, the Argentina beef or anything else.
It's fascinating, right? That to maintain the lies we tell ourselves, we can find even more insane ways to justify them.
Yeah.
And it is telling, right, that this has been going on for years now, right?
Mm.
With the way that we metabolize things like QAnon societally, right? Trump is simultaneously working in the shadows to dismantle the oppressive deep state at the heart of the US government, but also is a absolutely powerless bystander, oh my god, absolutely powerless bystander in the austerity regime that he's directly responsible for running. Give me
Yeah.
a break, you know, like
Yeah, and it's frustrating, and then, like, as like part of that frustration for me too is not just that like this is what you see from these people, but that fact that we like celebrate it, like, oh, they're just on the cusp. It's like, no, they're not. Um, they're not on the cusp of understanding because they're not going to actually change their minds.
which is
And
the exact problem.
we've seen this pan out dozens of times.
Exactly right, and I think like I forget where this comes from, but this has impacted my thinking, right? Which is ideology isn't what you believe about the world. It ends up becoming what you do to explain why the world is the way it is, right? And I think,
Yeah,
and it comes when people try to examine contradictions like these. And I think, like, for our beef farmer friends on TikTok, right? Their question is going to be, why didn't the political order that I voted for create this austerity regime that was allegedly, and like, for my benefit, actively derailing the entire thing that was promised to me. And what's that book that everyone keeps citing, When Prophecy Fails?
uh,
It was that one book about the one UFO cult that, like, kept thinking the end of the world was coming, and every time it didn't, they kept coming up with reasons for why it didn't.
yeah,
I forget the name of the book or what it was about, but that was the core idea, right? And that's kind of how, like, especially in the American context, right, where political consciousness is kind of engineered to be stupid. It's kind of engineered to seek simple
yeah,
explanations, and it kind of favors, scapegoating. Um, Ideology is going to be his explanation for why Trump is the innocent bystander, as you described, right?
yeah.
He could not have been the one who caused it. No one wants to admit that they could be lied to, but it
Well,
happened.
I mean, there was all the memes, and you still see it, right? Of like, we're voting for Trump because prices are too high now, but now like paying higher prices is patriotic, or
Right.
whatever else, right? Like it's using the ideology to explain around, like never accepting like the faults of it, or like like, okay, yeah, well, we thought this was a good idea and it's horribly backfired, and we don't really have a good explanation for why that's the case. We can't rationalize different, weird forces. Like we can make up elements of the deep state, but again, those are made up at the end of the day.
And I think that's the cosmic irony of it, is that, like, in a way, nothing changes. People will still go on believing what they believed, and the great real estate empire of Donald Trump finally makes its way to the White House. Um, I, I just You would think that, like, the White House being, like, cheaply reconstructed would inspire the institutionally minded Democratic Party to finally, like, take drastic action. But like you've said, they're still kind of waiting on the sidelines of this NYC contest to try and figure out next moves. And what I find,
Yeah.
we'll go ahead.
I was gonna say it's so weird that like this is because like this is something where you could easily write it up, right? I mean, this makes Marie Antoinette look like a leading philanthropist, right? The idea that I'm, like while all of you starve and suffer from the government being shut down, I am going to build the ballroom of my dreams uh, in the White House. And it's just, like this is a moment you could capitalize on, right? And like the symbolic meaning, right? Well, why would he, supposedly with his own money build, a room in the White House? Maybe it's because he plans on staying there, like it's like he probably plans on, using it and stuff like that. It's like a lot that they could do, and I just don't really see the messaging from like the Democratic leaders, right? They just seem totally anemic for the moment, which has been a consistent theme all year, if not, during the end of the Biden years too, right? I mean, but it's especially pronounced now when there is a higher demand for it. And I mean, I don't know if you saw this is, I mean, maybe comparatively inoffensive compared to other things, but I don't know if you saw his response when someone was asking him about uh, just the East Wing construction, how it was doing.
I don't think I did.
He was just talking about how he's like, oh, like you hear all that. It's the sound of construction. I love that noise. I'm like, that's the most unrelatable thing he's ever
But
said.
he's replaying the glory days, just playing general contractor.
Yeah, and he's like, it reminds me of money. But like the whole, I mean, just the idea, like, I love the sound of construction. It's like there is not a single other human being on this planet who loves the sound of construction. Like, as that's like the most unrelatable thing I've ever heard him utter, and that's saying a lot.
Oh my gosh, just the most naked display of old man replays glory days.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And then so again, let's maybe shift the camera to Trump's old stomping grounds in New York, right? Because I think the way that the race has kind of folded out is a compression of, well, there's no explaining Curtis Lewa. That guy's a menace. I don't Probably one of the single funniest. Again, someone was making this amazing comment, which is like, yes, the guy's funny, but why are we baby girling Curtis Lewa when he was like literally a anti-crime vigilante with like really weird right-wing views, right?
I
He
I
is definitely
think,
a
like,
crank, but
this is, like, the ideal, like, configuration of someone with that background, though, right?
right,
Or with those beliefs, is that, like, okay, this is someone who is like, Trump is enjoyable when he is not in office, when he is not doesn't have a chance of winning an election, right?
right.
Um, at least historically, maybe, now that's hard to imagine, partly because he is influential, but, like,
Oh
this
my
is,
god.
like, just having, like, these deranged lunatics where it's like, okay, like, he has no shot at winning. No one really cares. I mean, he seems to be motivated at this point purely out of hate for Andrew Cuomo, which,
Which
I mean, fair
based,
enough.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah, like
But it's just again, this guy's I they can't get me not to hate him because he is pretty funny, and
yeah,
there is this something very man on the street about both him and Zoran, where like they do seem very relatable, where Cuomo doesn't, and there is something funny about
the beret is not very relatable, but
no, the
I
beret
yeah,
makes him look like a Metal Gear character. Like I'm serious, he looks like a Metal Gear character every time I've
I
seen
think
him.
that's right.
But then again, there was like, so even Zoran fans find you very personable and charismatic, Mr. Sleva. What do you think about it? They're glazing me. Like that's again smooth. I have to give it to him. Very funny. I have to give it to him. Um, but to that main point, right? Of Cuomo not getting the L and jumping back in, being ready to split the vote from Sliwa and possibly handing this to Mamdani is an interesting calculation, right? Because it kind of does speak to and it's again, everyone talks about let's not relitigate 2020 and 2016, but in a sense, this is also like a revanchist return of, and this comes out of even the Obama um primary in 2008, right? I think this vote blue no matter who discourse has been going on way longer than a lot of us neophytes are aware of, right? And I think like, if you want to
Yeah,
take it as far back as what was it, the Pumas in the Hillary Clinton versus Obama contest, party unity my ass contingent.
sure.
There has always been that like streak within the Democratic Party apparatus that's like hostile to even the most marginal posture towards progressivism. And even though we can talk about like the Obama terms failures to deliver on that energy,
Yeah.
The fact that it existed and the fact that it manifested in the Cuomo response to losing the primary to Zoran speaks volumes to, this resentment that people have to like the centrist wing of the party that has actively been hostile to any posturing towards the left, right? Giving any concessions to um let's just call it the DSA contingent, right? And these are people, mind you, that are fully willing to work within the confines of the legal system, fully willing to cooperate and work in line with the Democratic Party. And any liberals or anyone like who wasn't part of their camp that's been friendly, they maintain good relations with. We can criticize that in another discussion, but I think it's worth calling out that, and we've met people like this in our college politics career, in campaigns we've worked on, whether you've been in certain social spaces, dear listener, like you've met this kind of person who's like inherently hostile to any change of course or any resentment to the party elite. We've all met people like that. And I think it's like the thing where, who does Nancy Pelosi appeal to? Somebody. You've met them. It's crazy, but it's true.
Well, I mean, she's got like 90% approval in the Democratic Party, so I mean, you
That's what I'm
definitely have.
saying. That's what I'm saying.
But and I think what stands out too is like I think the position, like that whole characteristic that you're describing, has grown less and less defensible over time, especially
Right.
in this particular case, right? I mean, for years we've talked about how like anyone can win in these elections, but now we have to like look broader, right? Like, well, what is electing Mom Downey going to do to the entire party brand, right? I'm like, well, I mean, the entire party brand, according to the right, is far left socialist, anyways. And this isn't like, me being hyperbolic. Look at who they associate the party with. But they don't associate them with like necessarily the positive qualities of these folks. They just like, far left. Um, and in this case, right, it's not like, Hillary versus Sanders, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, okay, like there's, you know, uh, Clinton is this more traditional politician, appeals to certain traditional demographics. She has, as much as she had a lot of haters, and I think that's been what's primarily remembered, is that, like, people really underestimated that. She was also really, really beloved by a lot of people too. Um, Definitely not now, but
Right.
at the time, was popular. No one really likes Andrew Cuomo. He represents the worst excesses of the party. It represents a certain hypocrisy that is often associated with it that also, pisses people off, right? It's, you can't make this whole thing about like the Epstein files with, if you were going to nominate a mayor who, there's a decent chance he was in there or at least was hoping to get in there, before it was a legal liability. Um, and he lost the primary. Now he's running again, the general. And just the fact that like you have all these party leaders who just refuse to sort of embrace the future, right? The current configuration of Democratic Party leadership is probably the least popular it has ever been at any point.
Right.
Even I mean even Harris, right, to the extent that people, that Trump's approval is low. Any polls that have said like, well, how would you have voted in the election given now, she still fucking loses, right? Like, and she's been like really bad about this too, where she's like, oh well, we need to like focus on like these future all stars of the party, and she like emphasizes, you know, mayoral candidates for like Mobile, Alabama, who lost the next day, or a couple days later.
Oh my
You know,
god. Did you see that the clip of Harris going around where she's talking to Jon Stewart, and you
oh
can kind of see
god,
the life leave his eyes
yeah,
when he
because it was a direct follow up, and like where she's like, "Oh, I think we need to like really focus on the future, or whatever." Or was it the other one? Because
No,
there's
I
like
think
two
it was
clips
it
going
was
around.
I think it was focused on the future, and then this was about specifically incrementalism and how like there's no strategy other than incrementalism. What are you talking about? And you could just see the light leave this man's eyes. Like it's horrifying to watch. But like
Well,
that is the defining, animus of that branch of the party that we've been so critical of all these years, right? The naked cynicism.
yeah, and I think, I think with the Harris case especially is like I think historically there's kind of like this like grace or what have you that's kind of given like extended towards these losers. Really in the short term at least, right? Where it's
Right.
like, like she had a raw deal dealt to her. It's just like with Hillary, the sexism, racism, like all, check all the boxes, all the isms that attributed to her loss. But then when you hear her and like the more she like goes on this like book tour,
Yeah.
the more I'm kind of baffled. And it's like I don't know what she like. I mean, obviously she's like kind of setting up for another run, I think. I don't know who is like her strategist, or if she's just going like, this is just me. This is authentic me, bitter and having learned nothing. Um, I don't because like the whole like thesis of her book, I haven't read it. I don't think it's out yet. Um, but like based on like everything we've seen from excerpts, is like the idea that like the Biden White House cudgeled her, right? It prevent, no daylight. She's prevented from really speaking, in any contrary terms to the administration. Um, has to just accept, all that stuff. It's very odd seeing like that also being paired with this messaging that is probably to the right of how she ran,
Yeah. And again,
which
like the criticism of Harris has always been that her politics have been deeply, deeply consistent.
well, you say that, but I know a lot of people felt that she ran um, as like a radical in 2020. Which, yeah, I mean, I'm not convinced either. Um, but I think the broad swath of her career more consistent than not.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you're off base there. What I really mean by that is like there's been like a mealy mouthedness if we look at her like again the 2020 run to being VP, and again like I don't know where her book is gonna go, right? Because to some extent I would even agree with that assessment that like the Biden White House probably did have tight control over her messaging. I wouldn't be shocked if that were the
Yeah.
case. But then the old man
I'm
is
not
gone.
impressed with what's seemingly your unrestricted message either.
That's what I'm trying to say. That's exactly where I was going, right? Is like so now that like Biden's no longer in the room with us, okay? The administration's no longer there. You don't answer to any of these same people, allegedly. What's stopping you from speaking your mind? And I would not be shocked if she genuinely believes two things to be true, that she was suppressed from speaking her mind by the Biden White House, but incrementalism is the only thing you can do. I wouldn't be shocked if she believed that. I also do think that the waffling, I mean, let's not. I'm relitigating 2024, but you know where I'm going with this, where it's like you had an opportunity, even if you didn't want to be radical, you had an opportunity to distinguish yourself from Biden, and then you didn't take it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think it's a
Well,
fully forced, or it's a fully unforced error on her part, and she can
well, and
admit
then
that.
she emphasizes that there's one thing that she would have done differently, which she did do and seemingly forgot that she did, which was advertising that she would have a Republican in the cabinet. Which again was I don't think that was seen as a huge betrayal by the base per se, but it was just kind of like another aspect of just like you're not making anyone enthusiastic, right?
Yeah,
Like the whole problem of there's nothing I would do different from Biden. I think that probably turned off more of your quote unquote median voter types than it turned off liberals or leftist. Um, I mean, yeah, I think it did, to an extent, especially over like Israel Palestine, but I think it was a bigger error with independents who were not necessarily who were seeing the Biden presidency as something of a failed presidency, which I think again like history is not going to look fondly back at those years, right? To the extent that we have given credit over different things done by the administration that
Right.
it was arguably for policy objectives that we would find desirable. It was better than, many others in recent memory. The simple fact that Trump reclaimed the White House at the end of the day is going to, permanently mire his administration's rankings.
Yep. So I guess maybe to tie the threads together, right? Because that is the spiritual rot maybe at the heart of the centrist wing, the wing that has taken. I mean, it's the natural that's the natural distillation of it. And if you look at what Cuomo's trying to do, right? Who does he represent other than landlords and like the Israel lobby? What does he really represent?
I am based
Uh,
on his recent campaign ad, which used AI. I'm assuming maybe there's some connection there too. I don't
so okay,
know.
the deeply deregulated tech industry that's running a bubble at this point.
Which I
So
mean,
you
also,
got
I mean, that's not going to matter in New York because I don't think they have any meaningful industry there regarding AI.
no, the tech industry is pretty well represented. I wouldn't say that there's a
Is
lot
it
of like.
okay?
It's not that there's a lot of headquarters in New York, from what I understand, but at least like tech offices are all strewn across New York for sure.
Okay, well then there you go. There's your constituency. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, so it's like okay, you've got tech and corporate employees who like are softer on AI for whatever reason. So it's like again, you have that contingent just basically saying like we are refusing to read the room, right? In what is clearly a cost of living election that both Mamdani and Sliwa have an answer to. And you can tell who we're biased for, right? Um, Cuomo's just like this weird, like one man operation to remind the plebs who's really in charge.
Yeah, and as we kind of the thesis of this particular conversation is that doesn't that's the part of like that party and like maybe the entire political class that is deeply alienating to folks
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah,
Just before incrementalism was kind of this like hold on, the adults are talking, but now it's like okay, well you've seen incremental gains wiped out in like a day um, of the Trump administration.
right.
You've seen like and some of this is even like incrementalism. It's just like I don't even know. Like, how can we make things worse? And so much of like I think the opposition to the Democratic Party from a lot of conservatives isn't even so much ideological. It's just that they picture the people like Andrew Cuomo as like this is who the party is and what it represents. Like these slimy, power obsessed political class.
Exactly, exactly. I don't think there's a better way to describe that. And it's like that archetype just keeps showing up. You know what I'm saying? It's the Cuomos,
Yeah.
it's Rahm Emanuel, it's I mean, we can just name the Rose Gallery at that point. And this is their revanchist tantrum, and I think that's probably why the party is waiting to see because just in case Cuomo somehow cinches it, they want to have their answer ready, or they want to start getting ready for explaining why Cuomo lost. I think what's Adam Gentelson's new outfit called? What is it?
Oh, I don't
Lighthouse,
remember.
Searchlight, whatever it is, right? Um, that contingent is always looking for ways to uh,
Searchlight.
ju- yeah, Searchlight. That outfit is probably already generated 50 ways they could spin this, but something that I did want to comment on, at least because it keeps coming up, right, is like Mamdani's radicalism kind of being softened at certain points. And I will admit that I felt disappointed by it at a couple points, but I think like what's telling in a lot of this, and what we probably won't get an answer about formally, at least for a bit, is how much of the softening on positions is happening because deportation's kind of being dangled over his head. I think this is the first time we've seen like the right try to. I mean, they've talked openly about stealing elections before, but I think trying to get a candidate's citizenship revoked so they can't run in a race is it's pretty slimy. It's pretty scuzzy.
Yeah, and like there's push from the legislature now to actually like somehow find a way to like not confirm his election, which is I don't even think the House of Representatives has any sway over, but it's certainly a violation of any like federalism.
Oh,
Um,
for certain. And I think like that's one of the things we're seeing with. We always knew it would never be easy to bring this type of politics into the mainstream. I think everyone's kind of internalized that to some extent. I think there's always been concerns about how authentically radical someone can be, but it is something that I do want to think on is the quite literal threat of violence against you one of those limits to using um elections as a strategy. And I think like again, if you're trying to do it legally, it's a threat you'll have to accept. If you're trying to do it through the electoral system, I think there will be challenges like this. And we're kind of seeing them in real time, right? That arguing for a radical position and to Mamdani's credit, right? Like the whole thing that he's trying to get that they're trying to nail him on is this globalize the Intifada line, right?
mhm.
Um, I'm wondering that in the ways that stronger, more radical position that he had is being tempered and softened.
Well, I don't think he like that was the one that he never actually said, right?
Right, but there's a bunch of like preemptively corrective moves that I'm seeing, right?
Sure, and
Like again, which I again like I'm only here to have a discussion about it. I'm not really here to talk about what's correct, right?
no, and I was just gonna say like on that issue, like I think really I mean really the one that seems to be primarily people are more concerned with, and it's the only one that he really has any like power over is like that they would arrest Netanyahu if he like came in um to the into New York City because everything else, right? I mean, it's not like I mean, you can't like send New York troops to Gaza or something. I mean,
Right.
there's nothing he can like really like. It's kind of that weird thing that APAC has historically, and like I guess we're seeing like the inverse of it now, where there's just not like he's running for an office where there's like foreign policy is barely meaningful.
Right.
Um,
So even the injection of the issue by the whether we want to call it, like if we want to call it the Zionist media, if we want to call it the right, if we want because again it's a
it, the
promulgation. It's not really
conglomerates of
exactly,
yeah.
exactly. It's not any one party in general, but a bunch of them capitalizing on it. I think is the controversy was like him going out of his way to condemn Hamas, and I think like one of the things that I've considered is why specifically does anyone who's condemning the violence we're seeing, right? Why why does our condemnation matter one way or another? And I'm not saying that you have to have a definitive take on Hamas or any other international or geopolitical actor, right? But one thing that always gets me about these discussions is why does my opinion matter? and what are you gonna do with it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. In
It
his
just seems like
case,
a very weird way for someone to take control of the narrative when they ask you, "So, what's your opinion on this group?" You know what I'm saying?
well, I think particularly for Muslim Americans, that's been really pronounced for
Yeah,
decades,
yeah.
right? I mean, anytime there was a terrorist attack, do you condemn this? And I mean, yeah, like there's a certain, I mean, there's an inherent racism to it, right? Like the fact that you need to go out of your, like, I mean, I don't think anyone's going, to me necessarily and say, do you condemn Hamas? Right? Like, I don't expect to see, that to like be an encounter in my daily life.
Mhm.
Um, but and I think to an extent we're seeing a little bit of a I, I don't think it's a super firm pushback on it, but I think there's a little bit of a like kind of we're at least having these conversations a little bit more, right? Where it's like, well, like you get your Bill Maher types who are like, like people are protesting Israel, but they're not protesting like, this senseless murder in the streets of, wherever else. It's like, well, like the whole point of protests is to try to, inject some type of political change, and there's not necessarily anything you can do that for. And like if it's like there was the that subway stabbing in New York
Right.
not that long ago, right? It's like, well, like what is there to protest here, right? Like everyone thinks it's a horrific act that shouldn't have happened, but it's not like if the police did it, yeah, then you would protest because like hold on, like you have control over to an extent how police officers act in
Yeah.
your jurisdiction. You don't necessarily, like I'm going to protest crime. It just sounds silly.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. So I don't know. Like I didn't have anything conclusive to go with there, but it's just like there is something to be said, at least, and we'll see how this plays out in the future. I really do want to see Zoran win the NYC race.
yeah,
I would like to, see the right really repudiated on this. But I do wonder what this spells for like understanding the limits of using um electoral politics and elected positions as a tool for like, working class movements. I would like to see it go somewhere positive.
yeah, and I mean, I think there's naturally limits, but I also think that like there's i using it at least opens more doors than it closes to have
Yes.
like an
No,
adversarial.
I would agree. I would agree.
Yeah.
Um,
Should we transition? I know we're kind of a little off the
we
track
have
here. There's a couple points I really wanted to get to, but I figured we should probably get into the Grand Plantner stuff a little bit. How much of that have you followed?
I had basically a 5-minute discussion with John about it. He's texted me, "What's your thoughts on this Grand Platinum situation?" I'm like, "Who the fuck is that?" 5 minutes later, how the fuck did he not know what a skull was? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everything I looked at about it, because I know like I had someone like kind of say, "Hey, this guy looks promising," and I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
It's not the first time I've seen a progressively self-described progressive run as an independent or this style of like more radical left-ish figure run for an elected position, and especially in recent years nothing seemed too scary and I wasn't following this up close. But then like the minute I was reading the articles about it where it's like, okay, you're a former Marine stationed in Croatia and you got a Totenkopf tattooed on your chest, I don't believe for a minute he didn't know what that was. I don't believe it for a minute that you don't. You know what I'm saying? Like that's
Sure.
such a iconic symbol in pop culture alone of like, hey, it's Indiana Jones, the Nazis pulled up. What do they all have on their uniforms? It's a Totenkopf, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's seen that. And again, like the Marine Corps, again, I know the joke is that they're jarheads. They know what that is. Okay, SIGINT is part of training. We all know what that is. No one's shocked that like um these symbols will come up in like call signs and stuff like that. If
Hmm.
anyone's been following like the Fort Bragg stuff, like this shouldn't shock anybody, right? And then to be stationed in Croatia, okay, like you're looking at like fall of the Soviet Union, resurgence of like right wing stuff, all this stuff. A guy being there on duty and getting a Totenkopf tattoo is not surprising in that sense. What's surprising is getting caught. That's what this comes down to. And just again, like being this Reddit guy who's like, yeah, I'm a communist, but also having like weird, like, um, regressive views, and then like really posturing as like leaning into this radical set. I wouldn't be surprised again if he was like, hey, I've changed. You know what I mean? I haven't followed the story very closely, but just again, him saying he didn't know what that was, I called bullshit immediately. And I don't know if that's the fair read or not.
Yeah, so I haven't followed it as closely either. I mean, I think you hit all the major points for it. There's been some interesting discourse surrounding it. I think the Reddit posts especially were I think there was maybe too much hay thrown over those. I think the tattoos are definitely worse. But there's, it's kind of reopened these discussions over, like what's not so much what's acceptable, but like what are we willing to like, forgive, or like, how much, can someone like, be redeemed or whatever. And I think there's stuff like that. I mean, will he, if elected, which I mean, to be fair, his polling hasn't actually been too adversely affected by this. Granted, we're just in the primary stage now, so it's him versus Maine's current governor, whose name's presently escaping me. But this would be to go up against Suzanne Collins in the fall, and it's just
Okay.
It's kind of just one of those things, right? Where I feel like, maybe this highlights how someone like Susan Collins has remained in office as long as she has. Like just like that. It's just like so much like sheer incompetence, right? At like finding like a strong candidate here, right? And I don't know. I mean, like, there's been a lot of candidates who talk a progressive game who don't wind up being such. John Fetterman, probably first and foremost among them. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, like it's one of those things. I'm curious to see how it pans out as like we get closer. But yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some problematic elements here.
I would agree with that, because I think like again, like just given the current political climate, I think people are correct to be less forgiving about any kind of snafu with Nazi iconography. I think that's probably
Sure.
a good instinct to have these days. But again, it's just everything about his story doesn't add up to me, right? Where it's like, so you claim that you became an internet communist, but then like you didn't develop like a healthy aversion to like Nazi aesthetics. You didn't like, read about any
Right.
of this stuff and be like,
Right.
hell yeah.
You'd think that would have like come up before, some of the deeper stuff, right? Like,
It's just again, it's everyone has seen a pic of like some Nazi freak with a Totenkopf on his hat or his uniform.
yeah.
Everyone's seen a movie of a guy wearing that. Everyone's seen an Indiana Jones and all the Nazi shit. Everyone's played a video game where you're shooting Nazis. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you were on Reddit, you have probably seen Nazi officers with a Totenkopf in their uniform, and the caption being, "This is my grandfather who was shot by the Soviets in World War II." You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't buy it for a fucking minute.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
That's my 2 cents on Grand Platinum. I guess what else? Where else are we on this? JD Vance's Halloween meme fuckery. I don't even know if we can get into this. Just him literally trying to get epic and like get relevant again. We already talked about it before with the.
There's been a few of those things where he's been trying to like appropriate the like the JD Vance memes, and it just comes
Yeah.
across as really cringy.
I mean, it's him returning to his roots, right?
Yeah, to an extent, but it's like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, it's always, I don't know. I mean, like there's a way to tap into like the meme culture surrounding you in like an endearing way. But I think like these memes, like, I mean, they're not like, they're not coming from a place of like good humor, right? They're coming from a place of like we fucking hate this guy, right? Like what's he gonna do next for next Halloween? Is he gonna like, pose with a couch?
Right.
Or would that be a little too on the nose? Um, but you know what I mean? It's not like with like the Dark Brandon stuff, right? Was more
Yeah.
so, probably exaggerating to an extent, certain accomplishments and whatnot. But there was something where it's like, yeah, like him acknowledging those, especially for someone who kind of otherwise felt distant. You feel a little seen with that when you see JD Vance, who you're making memes of because you hate him, embrace them. You just kind of feel maybe a little icky about it. You don't really
Oh yeah.
feel like, it's just like, oh well, like maybe it's a way to like get people to stop making memes because they're just like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to make him feel seen. I don't know. Like maybe that's like the sort of counter like reactionary thing there, but I don't think it accomplishes anything that he actually wants to by acknowledging that these things exist.
Yeah. It's especially freakish. I think like the other stuff I had on the outline, because we've really I f- there was so much bottled up that we got to, right?
Yeah,
I had a couple things. We're probably gonna work later down the line on another state of the tech industry AI episode.
sure.
Um, but I think like again, like I wrote this down: tech industry scam state on full steam ahead. Um, I think
Yeah,
it's no shock to anybody that like with the launch of like GPT-5 and then like this deep integration with AI into everything. Um, if you have the misfortune of working at actually any fucking workplace that has a enterprise software suite, whether it's Microsoft or whether it's the Google Drive suite, right? Both of them are trying to finesse AI into their tools.
and I
And
was thinking about that too, where like it's interesting now because like you can like by the numbers you can sort of point to like well people are really using AI, but it's just because it's been like force coded into everything, right? Whenever you do a Google search, the first thing that comes up is the AI answer, which is
right.
always great, to say the least. In academia, we had this conversation at a meeting, and it was kind of weird that our university, there's this big concern about like, oh, are people using AI to cheat? And I'll be honest, I haven't seen a ton of evidence to suggest that that really is happening at
Okay.
scale. No one I've talked to has ever been like, oh yeah, like all my students are using AI. In some cases, we might have some that we wish were using AI, um, you know, just to get something in or whatever. Um, but the weird thing is that like we're paying for um kind of a special version of Gemini. Basically, it's just like if you pay into it, like for like that Office suite or whatever, the difference is that the broader software can't train off what you put it in or what
Hmm.
you input it into. And it's just like weird where it's like on one hand, like why do we have like we're concerned about this at like a disciplinary university level. But why is the university also paying for like access to this stuff? If we're concerned that it's a problem, it's just weird.
No, everything about it is so weird, right? Because we're seeing like a resurgence of like I wouldn't say that let me put it this way. So there's a if you looked at the CrowdStrike failure that was earlier this year, there was the
Mm,
AWS outage that affected everyone last week, right? Um, we're seeing that, as society is shifting towards cloud computing, especially, there's a big like infrastructural burden to keep this thing running, and it's not as stable as it's built to be 100% of the time, right?
yeah,
So that's why, you're seeing the conflict with communities as data centers are flooding the landscape now, right?
yeah.
And I think people are right to be worried about the environmental and zoning impacts, right? I think that's not a bad thing to worry about. I think the NIMBYs are kind of justified on this one, believe it or
And it's
not.
kind of a weird one too, where kind of like the NIMBY stuff, like classically, right? Like where do you put like your dumps and stuff like
Right.
that? It's kind of in that same territory where like this doesn't actually really benefit like the local communities that house these data centers. Like
And the other thing is,
they've got to be put somewhere, but there's no like actual real tangible benefit to having them located closer to home.
especially when you realize that like data centers aren't even like holistically for anything. They kind of just they're rent to servers at a point. You
Yeah.
don't even know like if especially if they have like a an NDA on who their clients are, you might not know who's buying hosting space at a particular data center near you. So that's already problematic, right? Unless it's a dedicated thing for a particular company. Um but also with that, right? So we talked about the vulnerability of the cloud. Also, there's a rising threat of cyber crimes, right? Especially in
Hmm.
a recession like this, and we've seen this, probably since the pandemic, the rise of phone and internet scams, phishing, and stuff like that is way more common and prevalent.
I would
AI
take that even
scams.
further back. I mean, that's pretty much been like kind of the prevailing concern vis-a-vis most crimes. I would say almost our entire lives.
I that's actually, yeah, that's even better than what I was going with, right? So it's like cybercrime is only magnifying as, the infrastructural burden of tech isn't being addressed, right?
Yeah.
And what I find so bizarre is that organizations are deeply aware of this and are still convinced, despite even some people being smartly, skeptical of AI, are still convinced that you can take AI companies at their word about data privacy. Think about it, right? You have every employee or every user of your system, their files, data, and work, and to that end, right? Linguistic habits, patterns, right?
Yeah.
Just being leveraged by the platform, and they can give you an enterprise security, guarantee all they want, but it's not the first time the tech industries have lied, you know.
Hmm.
I'm not here to say that to cause paranoia. I'm just saying like this is the state of the industry. Let's not delude ourselves, right?
Right.
So it's like, you look at like these software packages, you have to justify your rise in price and your desire to monopolize your subscription services with your clients. So AI is going to be the justification, even though I would say, like you said, if it looks like students aren't using this to cheat, that's proof enough that it doesn't do what people say it does. And people talk about this trend of work slop, right? Of not having enough time to deliver on a task, so you use AI to produce it, but then the remaining time you have is spent correcting the AI's work. So the software itself is like
Hmm.
it's made work culture 100 times more toxic than it already was. It's another way for software providers to kind of, really offer bloated contracts and capitalize on a captive market. But we're seeing like, in this environment where, again, cost of living's through the roof for people. People have concerns about economic and political stability. And I think in an environment where tech CEOs, fintech CEOs, upper management types feel very empowered and emboldened to, again, like there's something very prescient about like return to office being like a critical business culture directive post like the hollowing out of the federal government, right?
Yeah.
um Work culture is getting worse, and AI is like one of the tools that's allowing that to happen, and you're going to see it like erode what was probably working okay in a lot of organizations before this.
Sure. Well,
um
I think there's maybe just maybe this is just part of like the tech industry like perpetuating scams over the years, right? Is that like a lot of companies just constantly sort of recycle how they do things.
Yeah.
right? Seemingly, and I'm like, this has to just be like a circle jerk or something, right? Of just like you put out this new product to, re-overhaul our UI or whatever. And we'll just buy into it, retrain everyone, relearn it just for like I don't know, we scratch your back, you scratch ours. I don't know, but it feels like there has to be something going
No,
on.
that's 100% that is 100% the case
Yeah.
because again, like OpenAI's, alleged domination of the market, right, comes in due to the fact that Microsoft ponied up a lot of the cash, right? And
Hmm.
they promised an integration, and that's how we got Microsoft Copilot, right? Which is a Microsoft branded version of ChatGPT. So there's a lot
Yeah.
of just like, a bunch of people trading the same big cartoon bag of cash from one hand to another. But that's again like that's the beauty of the Trump blitz as we've been calling it, right? Keep this scam running while 1,000 others are also happening. And I don't think anyone's ready to pay the price for what this is about to incur,
Yeah.
If subprime mortgage was bad, I don't want to imagine how this is going to play out.
Right.
So, with all that being said, too, right? Trading bags, using distractions has paid out well for one Larry Ellison from the same set as Elon Musk, no less, right? And also like I don't know if he's always been a conservative, but he was deeply involved in like being in Trump's like, political patrons recently.
Yeah.
And for again, him and his family actually to make the move into what was it, Paramount and CBS?
I
But
believe so.
basically
Yeah.
like
Paramount was
yeah,
the one that it
so
was kind of the big start of this.
so Paramount and CBS being part of like, the Ellison family's gems has really like shot him back to being richer than Musk, and also like this unprecedented control, one with his investments in the tech company Oracle, right, a major database
Hmm.
services provider. Um, if your organization has a database, chances are it's Oracle, right? So
Yeah.
you've already got that insertion into corporate contracts and government contracts, but then also the ownership of the media at this point, right? And for him to kind of I was going to get more angry about this before, and then like, a lot of the Charlie Kirk psychosis despair took over me, but it shouldn't be lost on anybody that making the decision to make Barry Weiss of all people the editor for CBS,
Yeah.
it's a blatant move by the right to like literally delegitimize and buy up the media space. You could almost consider it akin to like what Bezos did when he bought
The
he bought the
Washington Post.
yeah, when he bought the Washington Post, right? And people had this whole thing about like, well, Bezos isn't as right wing as other individuals. Still, why does one guy have control over a major media arm? That should worry
Yeah.
everybody. And
Yeah.
in this case, with both Oracle's takeover and getting Barry Weiss in charge of CBS, this is a blatant attempt to one really mystify and worsen, uh the state of things in Gaza, because Barry Weiss is, one of the most fervent defenders of Zionism, and basically has always had her hands involved in like hyper libertarian left bashing projects, whether it was like her University of Austin fraud or whether it was like her time in print media, just writing absolutely inane articles,
Yeah. I
um
was gonna say,
so like
John Oliver did a really good takedown on her a couple weeks ago,
okay.
which incited a incredibly cringe response from Olivia Reingold, who's like, I don't know what exactly her stake in this is. seemingly being a fangirl to an extent. Also, definitely a Zionist. She's the one who published the article that really downplayed the famine in Gaza,
Yeah, yeah,
mostly
yeah.
pointing to like well they also have other horrible medical conditions in part because of
So
years of.
Chapo did a piece on Olivia Reingold, I think a couple weeks ago, where it's like
Oh, okay.
we're not gonna get into all that, but Olivia Reingold's insane for um basically like downplaying the famine in Gaza right after or basically when her like
And in a
she
really arrogant way too.
oh
Like
of
like, "Oh,
course
I did, this basic thing called a Google searching and whatnot," and it's like, well, you also did it really sloppily, first off, but it was just,
I
like,
oh my
super arrogant about, her own, like, journalistic cred, and that's, like, again, one of her, responses. She did, like, a parody is giving her too much credit of what she made for, last week tonight, but, there is a very cringy video she put on TikTok and then deleted, but you can find it anywhere on the internet because people are using it to mock her.
well that's the thing they were getting into, which is like she wrote this absolutely insane piece about her eating disorders, and there was just something so cosmically horrifying about like this woman with her eating disorders commenting on the alleged fitness of people starving in a famine, an induced famine by the state of Israel, no less, right? So
Yeah.
it's brutal, and I think like again, um, Barry Weiss being a repeat guest on Joe Rogan is already disqualifying. But I will give Barry Weiss credit on one thing, which is always hating Tulsi Gabbard.
Sure.
That's like the one thing I'm like, okay, I can hand it to you there, but that was an easy call. In hindsight.
Yeah.
Um, now this is something we've been waiting on doing for a minute. Um, we have two final things in the outline. So the first, I almost called him Ethan, Ezra Klein. You've had a bone to pick with this man for a minute. I think we've talked again at length about how the abundance agenda sucks, how this guy is run cover for the right, how his defense of Charlie Kirk. I mean, we didn't talk about this, but not to relitigate it, his defense of Charlie Kirk was absolutely shameful.
Yeah.
It was just absolutely shameful. I don't have anything else to say.
Right. So Ezra Klein, who I actually think probably politically, as much as Ethan Klein has been catching a lot of controversy, I think he politically might be worse than Ethan Klein. Um, but yeah, Ezra Klein. So I've been, and it's been a minute, but I've been like down this like pipeline of like watching his like engagement with other folks. And engagement might exaggerate it to an extent. Like we're, I don't think we're necessarily getting like great intelligent discourse here because what I've really picked up on is abundance is, for lack of a better description, kind of this moving target.
Yeah.
Right, like, it's not like he kind of refuses to clearly identify key elements, and I think in part because it's really rooted, I think, more so in political opportunism than anything else. Um, but he wrote, his, with, Charlie Kirk's death, he wrote, an article where basically the thesis was that Charlie Kirk was practicing politics in the quote unquote exact right way. Which obviously, if you're critical of him, this is, shocking. Like this is an alarming, statement. Even if you're not, I mean, it's kind of like, well, what do you mean the exact right way? And I think he really mischaracterizes it, right? This was kind of one of the biggest pieces, from anything on like the ostensible, like liberal leftist. Not that he's a leftist, but anything like left of center ish in theory discourse. This was really part of like kind of I think that that gaslighting, saying the line around who Kirk was. And in particular, there was a debate where he had with another journalist, Tanahashi Coates. I'm not as familiar with his work, and I will say I found I didn't have a problem with his role in the debate. Just the fact that I think he was more polite than I would have been
Right.
under similar circumstances. Um, but that's, I mean, as far as critiques go, that's probably, not the worst one to ever get. But a lot of this was kind of this, he had written a follow-up piece, like kind of condemning that article on like Charlie Kirk practicing politics in the exact right way. And what struck me was there was just a lot of things about this debate that frustrated me. One, Ezra Klein just kind of comes across as very like kind of like he comes across very coastal elite because he is.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, like this whole like notion of like abundance is this political movement in his terms to sort of rebrand the party. I think, coastal elitism is like the sort of the anchor that's like tearing it down into the ocean, right? That's always been like this part of the brand that the right has particularly attacked. Um, but one of the things that like stood out is like his idea is that like he thinks that we don't really have conversations anymore with the other side. We're not trying to persuade people, whereas Kirk supposedly was. And one of the things that really frustrated me was kind of taking this back to 2016. We're relitigating it once again with Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables comment.
Yeah.
And to me, like what's really frustrating about that is like to say that Kirk was practicing politics in the exact right way, and we need to distance ourselves from basket of deplorables, which I think has been kind of forgotten about.
Yeah.
To me, those are completely incompatible worldviews.
No, I would tend to agree, right? Because if you take a look at the course of events, now that I can start to look at my suppressed memories, Charlie Kirk quite literally says the whole, I don't even want to repeat the whole "if the pilot's black, I'm scared" line, right? They only
Right.
got the job because of DEI, right? That leads to like the
God's
various
perfect
cuts.
rule around gay people is stoning them.
Right, all that stuff, right? And that leads to like the very first round of cuts at the federal government at the start of this year. That leads
Yeah.
to like that horrible airport crash, right? There's literally a one-to-one relationship there. And like
Yeah.
if you call that practicing politics the right way, get fucking ready to get wrecked for that. I don't have any sympathy for this clown.
Right.
Like,
Well, and I think, because it came up when like there was a little bit of pushback. He's like, well, then why did he win? Which, I mean, considering the timing, I would hesitate to say that he won. Um, maybe that's a little dark, but like the idea is like, well, this is how you win, is that you are willing to like say some nasty shit every so often. Right, you're willing to dehumanize people. You're willing to throw people under the bus. And watching some of his other debates on, like I think particularly the Sam Cedar one on like what is abundance, he's kind of critical of like, and it's just, there's a lot. I'm like, the more I think about it, I'm like, oh my god, there's just so much weird things about this guy. But he's like kind of at war with the quote unquote the groups, which is this very like
the Sierra Club is the reason we can't have suborbital factories. That's his take on it,
basically, yeah, like that, like, but he's not willing to like name the specific groups that are getting in the way of like in the case of that debate, San Francisco housing. Right, he was very like obscure here, but then with this debate, he's much more big picture. But like the thing is, like, it's if the idea is like, well, like Kirk, yeah, he was nasty, but he was engaging with people, and this worked. It was electorally effective, as evidenced seemingly by Trump's 2024 win. How do you then say that, well, calling the other side deplorable, even though that's ostensibly what it was, this is not fine? It's just weird to me.
Well, everything about Klein's approach, like you said, is opportunistic and hypocritical because
Like, to me, it's
in
like very
so
clear that he just wants to cozy to the right as much as possible. Like his response for like when he was asked like, well, why did you could have just said nothing. You didn't have to write this article. You like put this out immediately. Like you had to like blitz through whatever research you were doing on Kirk to like put this article out there. Because it came out like literally the next day, like the next morning. And his like, well, I had to like, I felt like, when I saw people suffering, on that side, I wanted to be like, I'm here suffering with you, which is just, I mean, that just screams opportunistic, right?
Right.
Like
I
my
mean,
gut instinct, if someone passes away, it's like, I'm really sorry for your loss. I'm not like, it's my loss too. Like,
well, and it's not just someone passed away. Like a major influential operator in the Trump camp
yeah.
had finally had his luck run out on all the shit he talked over the years, right? That's my read of the events. Is we can talk conspiracy theories all day. I'm not going to downplay that him talking out of both sides of his mouth got him to where it got him, and we
I
can
mean, I think regardless of whether you buy any specific conspiracy theories or the general facts, I think that's generally the consensus.
that okay. So and that's what I'm saying, right? And it's like everyone again is so felt compelled to say something because again the gory image prompts a response. I feel like that's like and I'm not trying to say this in a cynical sense, but like anytime there's like a gory like reveal, people feel compelled to say something. I'd
When
say
I think And I think too in this specific space, right? Because he like iterates later that like what his like dream is of like his himself is like a political commentator in peacetime. So like the idea, which is a very privileged statement,
right.
but the idea that like we like I think it was that like this journalistic political commentator class in particular felt threatened in that moment.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. But then again, for that also there's so many things I can say about this that I just oh my god. I mean again it's the fact that on the same day that that happened there was an actual school shooting
Yes.
that got suppressed. You know what I'm saying? Like that news didn't
Yeah.
get out. But like we got to go mourn this guy who like quite literally was like making student life more toxic by the day.
Yeah. It said that
Like
they're a
that
necessary consequence.
right. You know what I'm saying? So like that's already bad enough. But then if you even take like Ezra Klein at his word about all this, I thought his pitch in abundance was and this is where like he doesn't even believe what he's saying because he would have credibility if he followed his own advice and like explained his argument. He was basically trying to articulate that political division is exacerbated due to perceptions of shortages. So if the United
Yeah.
States just partners with and again this is where his ideology of like partnering with real estate manufacturing and like the industrial class to enable um a further like artificial removal of scarcity.
As if these
um
partnerships don't already exist.
and that's what I'm saying. We already live in a post scarcity in society. Yes, like obviously there's been like a lot of shakeups from the pandemic. Yes, like our inability to act on the environment is worsening things. But like if if they wanted to get their act together, I'm convinced they could. Like we can maintain post scarcity. That's not the problem. His thing is he needs to pitch a plan that's friendly to real estate. That's who he works for. He serves real estate. Let's not delude
Yeah.
ourselves about what this guy believes in. But he at least had a pitch there, which is like, I'm trying to end scarcity so that we don't have political division. He can't even keep his own story straight.
Yeah, and I think God, there's so much. I mean, there's two main points I wanted to iterate to that I was like, well, I have them in my mind on this. One, and this kind of shows again, like he takes this political chameleon approach in these like conversations, where with Tanahashi was like iterating like one of the issues that we have like especially vis-a-vis Charlie Kirk is just like racism and stuff like that and talking about how like there's this long historical view of like kind of like the post Reconstruction era and like things like that and
Yeah.
Ezra Klein's well we can't take like a historical view. I think that just obscures things and it's like to an extent I can understand in terms of like if that was like if the perspective that I don't think was being presented, to be clear. But if the perspective is like, how do we like recreate Reconstruction, um, like or like go back and like in time, I'm like, yeah, okay, like I get that that's maybe not necessarily the most politically practical discussion, but it was, it's like this is, we can't take a historical view. But then he also thought the abundance like argument was going to be between like new dealers and the new left, and it's like that conversation was resolved decades ago.
Right.
That divide doesn't really exist in the party
And
anymore.
in fact, as far as those two like constituencies exist, the new left won only to then
Yeah.
like get the shit rocked out of them by the third way.
Right, and he was, like, saying, like, "Oh, we're going after the new left." And it's like, I mean, and the third way, to be fair, does borrow attributes from the new left. I would say
Well, that's
definitely
because
more so
a
than.
lot of new left did make it up. I'm not going to downplay
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but it's just like, I'm like, this is like, so like we can take a historical view when it comes to like the fact that apparently you just haven't updated your knowledge of the party, seemingly, or things like that. And there's like other weird conversations too. And like I think this is like the broader thing I get out of like at least the way he frames and like markets abundance is that the idea is, what if the party just does what's popular? Right? I mean, I think that's kind of like like, and I don't think it does that. I think that's the idea. That's the marketing pitch, right? Is what if Democrats just took popular positions? And that's something I'm sympathetic to an extent, but like he's very specific on like which ones, and in some cases it's just completely wrong. And I was thinking like in that particular debate, he was highlighting Obama kind of campaigning as, I wouldn't necessarily say adversely opposed to gay marriage, but campaigning as not supporting it. And he was like, "Oh, this is an example like practicing politics right. That like Obama as a black man has to sort of take more moderate positions to make himself seem less radical. And this is a good thing." And it's like it's kind of tragic,
Yeah,
right?
that's the
Like
whole reason we were bringing it up with Mamdani, because it's like, does a radical position have to be softened because the mainstream won't accept it and on racist grounds,
especially
right?
from a person of color.
Exactly.
And like, yeah, okay, like I mean, but like highlighting this as like this is a good thing, not like, because I mean, like it's like to me, like yeah, a necessary evil to accomplish bigger things, right? Like we did get gay marriage legalized, though not really because of Obama, at least directly. Um, so like those things are a little weird on that, but then shortly after this, or actually it was right before this debate, he took this position on abortion, right? Saying that we need to elect like pro-life Democrats in, God, what was the example he highlighted? Nebraska or something? It was, if it wasn't Nebraska, it was a place that had just passed, or like a ballot initiative had just won for abortion rights.
I can't remember, but this is, oh my god. Because as soon as you said pro-life Democrats, like, what year is it? What fucking
Well,
year is it?
and when that's the thing too, because he was talking about, because he's like, well, I did a lot of work on like Obamacare back in the day, and back when Obamacare happened, there was, um, I can't remember the exact number, but there was some number of pro-life Democrats, right? Bart Stupak up in the Upper Peninsula, right, was one of them. Had the Stupak Amendment to Obamacare, which like kind of prohibited like the use of it on abortion, like the federal dollars on abortion, right? Like, okay, but like the thing is, it's like this is, again, like if you want to like, we can use historical precedent to strengthen our points, but we can't historically analyze things that are inconvenient for my agenda. Because why do we not have all those pro-life Democrats anymore?
Exactly.
It's not because they were necessarily like, it wasn't like there was a Tea Party-esque wave that just wiped them out. They all lost in general elections. Bart Stupak technically retired, but a Republican has represented the UP since he left office. Um, and so on and so forth, right? These people, they were wiped out in general elections. They weren't wiped out by the left in this country. And, like, and on an issue like abortion, right, where it's just public opinion almost couldn't be better in
Right.
terms of like the leftist perspective on it. And it's crazy because I mean, this is someone who also, holds pro-Israel views. That to me seems like if we're just like, let's make the party a party that does things popular. And this came up in the debate, and he had nothing to say on this. The idea that like, well, what if we took a different position on Israel because this is where the public stands? Crickets.
Yep. No surprise there. And it wasn't Ezra Klein with the Atlantic. Was he with that outfit?
Um,
Or was it Vox? I can't remember.
he. I don't know where.
It's okay because this
Yeah,
this all feeds into like my final question, and I view both of those publications in the same lens, which is
he was on Vox, not
he was on
Vox,
Vox.
Bloomberg, MSNBC, NYT, and Washington Post.
That's a spread. Because this all feeds into the final question I have, which is, does centrism really exist or is it a phantom? And I think we've been probably posturing towards and answering this in our own way for like many episodes at this point, right? But I think it's safe to say that like whatever was called centrism in the United States, whatever it was used as, it was always a cudgel to kind of remind a certain type of person you exist to support the neoliberal compact. You're here to keep the stock markets good. You know what I'm saying? You're not
Yeah.
supposed to drift towards the Nordic model. You are not supposed to drift towards austerity. I think that's what centrism used to mean. And in practice, the system has always drifted towards austerity. It can't really go any other way, right? Maybe in a couple systems you do have like Nordic model implementations, or you have some like state control over markets or what have you, but like in practice, like that's what the system's been. It's been austerity regimes over austerity regimes. And I think like again, like this myth of the centrist or the myth of the moderate um is like a distillation of political parlance or journalistic parlance watered down to mean absolutely nothing other than like a kind of virtue you can ascribe to somebody in a post John Birch world. I don't know how else to view it, right? If you inherently demonize radicalism, if you inherently demonize progressivism, socialism, anarchism, communism, or just any kind of a humanistic politics, if you espouse any of that in this post JBS, post Reagan, post Thatcher world, that's seen as something to be shunned. The
Yeah, I
cent-
mean, I was gonna say, I mean, I definitely agree with more or less that whole analysis. I think for me, what really highlights at least like modern centrism is it's this like roving target,
yeah,
right? It's this. I think it's the way like it does. It's a phantom in the sense that I think it exists to. I'll just go on and say it to highlight a lack of principles.
I think that's spot on. I think that because again, like everyone who I know who's been a self-described centrist, or like every politician that willingly describe, or any analyst that describes themselves as
Or
centrist.
you're trying to obscure what you actually are.
Yes, it's you're either lying or obscuring.
Yeah.
Because in practice, like center of what? Like any number of issues. If the two positions are let's have abortion, let's not. What's the center on that? You
And
keep
I
having
think
the fetus inside. Like what is it?
well, historically, I mean, that would have been kind of your like abortion under, that was like your Clinton era, like, um, safe but rare, to an extent, your exceptions, things like that. That's kind of your centrist-ish positions, but we've really moved away from those. Um, kind of, I mean, like, on one hand, because they don't really make that much sense, um, really from either perspective. Uh, you know what
Right.
I mean? Like, really from either perspective that you're going from, those half measures don't really make a great deal of sense. Um, but it's just, how can you like have something without it really being seen as aggressive, right? Seen as a major shift. Um, I think, and it's like, I think it's distinct from certain other aspects that we kind of associate with centrism, right? Of like, some of these more like procedural obsessed, folks that we get in government and to an extent out of government as well. Like, to me, like, it's this roving target that like you can
Yeah.
use to just obscure um your actual views, or you just don't really have actual views and you're just like, well, this at a given moment sounds like it makes sense to me, sort of the Joe Rogan model of just, nodding and agreeing with whoever's sitting in front of you. Um, that's kind of like, that's always been like my take, at least on like the modern configuration of it, right? Because I just don't feel like you see really anyone who's like, you know, uh, these are my ideals. They affix me into the rough political center, because now it's just like, it's like, what, as we see a widening gap, do you just like, well, like, I'm gonna have to drag my views a little bit further to the right just to perfectly, like it's a D&D alignment chart or some bullshit.
Yeah. Oh my god. And even then, even if we just take the D&D analogy, who has ever played a true neutral? Which one of you freaks has played a true neutral? I want to know.
So usually, I mean, and like anytime someone who does that, where like especially if like it's under the configuration of like rules where it matters,
Right.
it's someone who's just deliberately trying to be, a pain in the ass.
Just a murder hobo type player.
Right. Maybe literally murdering hobos to,
Uh, oh,
maintain a
that too.
neutral status.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Save a puppy here, murder a hobo there.
Yeah, it's just like what is centrism other than being Anton Chigurh at that point? Heads you live, tails you die. Like I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hyper literal about it, but it's always been one of those things that just in a time like this, there is no place to be wishy washy. There's no there's no there's no fucking space to lie to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that's all I got. I don't know. I don't know where to leave people. I'm probably as confused as the median observer. I do not expect anyone to have it all figured out. But holy shit.
Yeah, it's been a minute and a packed minute since our last episode.
It has. What has it been like, teaching politics in a moment like this?
Well, I was teaching, literally as Kirk was shot. So, it, and a media class at that. So,
Oh my god.
um, and there was that. It's interesting because like I get asked about this a lot. And I don't find it that. I mean, there's some people who maybe make it. I don't know, honestly want to say harder, but there's like some where I'm like, okay, like I got to be mindful of like, what do some of these folks think? But I've never really had an issue with it. I think maybe some of it is just because I teach and study things from a more systemic point of view, and it feels
Mhm.
like you could talk about things where like this is like sort of the state of the world. If you think this is good, you know, maybe keep that to yourself. Not like literally, but you know what I mean. Like I mean, like some people keep it to themselves, some people don't. But like it's like like this is maybe you think this is a good thing, maybe you think it's a bad thing. But like there's ways to cover it in ways that I think are more informative than like
Yeah.
just sort of your like neutral approach that you get from like the NYT, for example. But That's yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think there's always good discussions being had in politics and political classes. That's how I would put it.
Okay. The forum is still alive. That's good. I mean, that's reassuring in some sense. I don't know how else to tie this in a bow. This isn't really a time where you can tie things in a bow, I guess. Other than, I'm going to keep working on getting more content out. I want to find a way to continue publicizing the podcast, but in the meantime, dear listener, if you liked what you've heard, just do us a solid and pass the link on to anyone who you think would be interested. If you want to see this, program get amplified in the meantime, um 5 stars maybe. The best things in life are free, and this podcast is one of them.
That's the spirit.
Exactly.
Look at you. Marriage has already made you a much more positive individual.
There's a lot to figure out. I think like the post Kirk like social media scare everyone has been having about like what platforms are still safe to be on. I think a lot of that fear is kind of fizzled out, which is good.
I would agree.
But it is just like, but what is your relationship to the internet going to be at a time like this? And I think like I used to advise people like just get off anyways. But to some extent, like you kind of do need to stay in touch with people. This kind of is the only way you can get info sometimes, and it's like I'm personally still trying to figure out how to toe the balance. I don't think I have that figured out yet either.
Sure, yeah.
Well, until next time, dear listeners, we'll catch you on the next one. Take care, stay safe. Bye bye.